His severed head rolled gently in the snow, its lips still red, eyes wide and strangely serene, as if they were gazing not at the crowd, but at something far beyond them. The white of the snow met the crimson of his blood, steaming like breath from a dying god. Silence hung for one brief blasphemous second, until a child screamed and the world exhaled. Somewhere, a white handkerchief, once held tight by trembling fingers, drifted downward like a feather from heaven, then landed in the blood. The axe, freshly baptized, dripped in quiet triumph. They had done it. They had killed a king, but he was no ordinary monarch. He was Charles, the Anointed, the man who believed his blood was sanctified by divine decree, who saw Parliament not as partners, but as pests, nipping at the heels of God's vessel. He had spoken of sacred right, of celestial lineage, of kingship that answered only to heaven. And yet now his mouth, once filled with scripture and law, lay slack on the scaffold, whispering only to worms. What does it mean when a nation cheers the death of its king? Is it justice, or is it hunger? Is it a victory for the people, or merely the thrill of watching something holy bleed? His crown did not fall in battle, nor did he die in exile or silence. He walked to his death with calculated grace, draped not in robes, but in resolve. And when the blade kissed the nape of his neck, it was not just a life that ended. It was a belief that a man could rule by God's shadow alone, untouched by mortal law. He believed no blade could touch what heaven had crowned. But death does not kneel to kings. Death does not pray. It simply waits. And when it comes, even kings must bow. So the question is not why he died. The question is, why did they cheer? Before the axe, before the snow, before the silence, there was light, radiant and holy. Charles was born beneath the weight of prophecy, second son of a king, never meant to rule, and yet touched by an eerie grace. He was small, stammering, and delicate, but his tutors whispered of intellect. His courtiers whispered of God's favor. When fate turned, and his elder brother died, the crown moved like a shadow over his brow. And from the moment it touched him, Charles believed it was not a burden, but a blessing. He walked like a man sculpted for sanctity, every step deliberate, every word measured like liturgy. His hands signed edicts with the solemnity of prayer. He built churches that pierced the sky, commissioned painters to immortalize his form, adorned in silk and righteousness. The divine right of kings was no mere theory to him, it was marrow. To question his rule was to question the heavens themselves. He married a queen of France, Henrietta Maria, Catholic, radiant and reviled. He called her his dove, his sanctuary, his secret psalm. She brought pearls, incense, and scandal. England murmured. Parliament scowled. But Charles stood tall in the eye of the storm, believing love and authority both answered to him alone. He ruled with grace, with ritual, with a monarch's stillness. No outburst, no jest, no spectacle. Just cold, beauty and distant power. His court glittered with Van Dyck's portraits, each one painted like scripture. His word was unchallenged, his gaze unblinking. To his loyalists he was majesty incarnate. To the poets he was a living hymn, but beauty is brittle, and belief, when too devout, can make a man blind. He was not a tyrant who raged, he was a God who whispered. And what do you do, when the God on the throne forgets that men bleed? When elegance replaces empathy? When faith becomes a fortress? In his rise, there was no fire, no fury, only silence. And silence is where all tragedies begin. It did not come with thunder. There was no sword raised, no kingdom falling in a day. It began with a letter, sealed in wax, written in shadows. Then another, each one a warning ignored, each one a thread pulled loose from the crown. Charles believed compromise was sin, that Parliament was a nuisance, not a partner. He dissolved it, not once, but 3 times, then ruled alone. 11 years of personal reign, 11 years of silencing dissent with velvet gloves and iron will. He raised taxes no one agreed to. He arrested critics by royal decree. He weaponized faith, reforming prayer books, demanding conformity from pulpit to pew. And in his reflection, Henrietta Maria, the Catholic queen, smiled. To some, it looked like devotion. To others, it looked like betrayal. The people watched a Protestant nation slowly bend to Rome's breath. Whispers of a papist plot crept through taverns and pulpits, and still Charles stood still, as if cloaked in God's immunity. But power is not preserved by silence. It festers. When Parliament returned, it did not kneel. It roared, and Charles, wounded in pride and piety, made a fatal move. He stormed the House of Commons with soldiers at his back, seeking to arrest 5 members who had defied him. They were gone, warned, escaped. The chamber froze in horror. For the first time in English history, a king had breached sacred ground, not with words but with weapons. He left humiliated. England would never trust him again. And so we ask, was this arrogance or desperation? Was it a king defending order or a man losing his grip? He thought his touch was sacred. But sacred things are brittle, and when they break, they cut deeper than steel. In trying to silence the nation, Charles taught it to scream, and once that scream began, it could not be unmade. England bled, not from a single wound, but from 1,000 cuts, each one deepening with time, each one carrying the king's name like a curse. The country fractured into shadows, royalists who still saw a crown gilded by God, and parliamentarians who saw a tyrant cloaked in ritual. Fathers fought sons, brothers tore banners from each other's hands. The land groaned with the weight of civil war, and the throne that once stood untouchable now trembled on its legs. Charles watched it unfold with a quiet certainty, mistaking resolve for righteousness. He moved like a man walking through fire, believing he would not burn, even as his armies failed, even as towns fell, even as the people, hungry and hollowed, turned their backs. In the north, a battlefield drowned in fog, dead men frozen with bayonets still clenched. In London, whispers passed through alleyways like ghosts, that the king would sell England to Rome, that he drank wine as peasants starved, that he plotted with devils in silk and scarlet. The truth didn't matter anymore, only the fear, and fear multiplies. His closest advisors betrayed him. His letters were intercepted and published. His allies began to vanish, hanged or hunted. Even the Queen, Henrietta Maria, fled to France, the echo of her departure like a bell tolling the end. Charles was left surrounded by candles and silence. He still wore his robes, still quoted scripture, still believed. But behind every curtain, a blade waited. In every corridor, footsteps echoed louder than his voice. The palace that once echoed with music now breathed with paranoia. A crown weighs nothing on the head of a beloved king, but on the head of a hated one, it crushes. And so he bargained with enemies, promised peace to one side while summoning war from the other. He made secret deals with the Scots, signed treaties in desperation, but the trap had already been laid. He wasn't negotiating. He was drowning, and as he sank, the walls of monarchy, once marble and eternal, began to crack. So we ask, was this divine fate unraveling, or simply a man undone by pride? The divine right had become a divine blindness, and every step he took forward was into the arms of his captors. They did not kill him quickly. First they took the world from around him. Then they stripped the throne from beneath him, and finally, they let time do the rest. Imprisoned in Carisbrooke Castle, Charles became a relic, silent, ceremonial, half forgotten. The man who once bathed in golden light now woke to grey stone and frost. His chambers stank of rot and damp cloth. The cold gnawed at his joints. Rats scratched beneath the floorboards. Lice nested in his sheets. The King of England now slept beside vermin. They brought him food, tasteless and thin. His skin, once powdered and perfumed, now blistered and pale. He coughed at night, his breath came in rattles. His hands, once steady with royal decree, now trembled as he wrote letters begging for mercy, letters no one read. His hair thinned, his teeth ached, his spine curved. He aged not by years, but by days. Still he performed the theatre of divinity. He kept a small mirror, groomed himself, recited psalms aloud to an invisible court. He believed that dignity could outlast decay. But his body disagreed. The guards began to mock his rituals. One spat in his cup, another urinated near his bed. The divine king now a sideshow. Even the birds stopped singing outside his window. The wind howled where music once played, and in those final weeks, a strange silence filled him. Not peace, resignation. The kind that comes when a man realizes even God has looked away. He was moved to St. James's Palace. There, the preparations began. A block was built, the axe polished, the executioner's mask stitched. He knew what was coming, but still he clung to the myth that a miracle would save him. That his blood was too sacred to spill, but his body knew better. It sweated, it shook, it begged for rest. So we ask, if a man believes his body is holy, what does it mean when it starts to rot? They did not beat him, they did not stab him, they let the cold, the filth, the loneliness do what war could not, and by the end he was no longer a king, just a man, breathing, waiting, breaking from the inside out. It was morning, bitter and pale. January 30th, 1649. The sky hung low like mourning cloth. London stood still, not out of reverence, but disbelief. A king was about to die in public, not from illness, not from exile, but from the blade. Charles emerged from St. James's, dressed in 2 linen shirts. Not vanity, but calculation. He feared that the cold would make him shiver, and they would say he trembled in fear. He would die with dignity, if nothing else remained. Every step he took toward the scaffold was deliberate, like a priest walking to the altar. He spoke calmly, as if he were addressing Parliament, not eternity. "I am the King of England," he said, "a good man, a just man." He forgave his enemies, he forgave the executioner, he forgave the people who had paid to see his fall. And then he laid down. The block was oak, splintered, darkened from past use. He stretched his arms, placed his chin, whispered a prayer. A white handkerchief dropped. The axe rose, and then one stroke, a crack like thunder, a spray of blood across white snow, and the head rolled. Some say a gasp came from the crowd, others say only silence. But all agree. The executioner held up the head for all to see. And in that moment, history split. The sacred line of kings was broken. The body divine undone. Blood dripped from the lifeless mouth that once commanded nations. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere a woman fainted. Somewhere else a child wept, but most simply stood, watching steam rise from the stump where a crown once rested. Later the body was sewn back together grotesquely, the head stitched on with black thread. The crown did not return, only the shroud. So we ask, when the divine bleeds, who holds the power now? The people came to witness the end of tyranny, but what they saw was something stranger, a god dying like a man, a myth undone by muscle and steel, and long after the blood dried, the silence remained. The king was dead, and yet no church bells rang. No mourning procession lined the streets. No royal anthem played to guide his soul to rest. His body, wrapped hastily in linen, was carried through narrow corridors like contraband. Snow fell, muffling every step. Even the sky refused to weep. They buried him in secret, at Windsor, not Westminster. No golden tomb, no marble effigy, just earth and frost and silence. The clergyman assigned to the ceremony wept, not from devotion but from fear. Parliament had forbidden prayers over the king's grave. To bless his death was to risk your own. They stitched his name out of public speech. Portraits vanished. Coins were melted. His face became a ghost in the nation's memory. For a time it was treason to speak it. England, for the first time in its history, was a republic. Oliver Cromwell rose from the ashes, iron-willed, pious, unbending. He did not wear a crown. He did not sit on a throne, but make no mistake, he ruled. And the land, scarred by war and hunger, bowed again, this time not to divinity but to discipline. But a strange thing lingered in the years that followed, a haunting unease. The people who had shouted for justice now whispered in guilt. Some said the king's ghost walked the halls of Whitehall, that his blood still stained the wood of the execution block, that every winter on the day of his death the snow turned red near Windsor. He had become something he never was in life, mythic. So we ask, can killing a king free a nation or curse it? They buried a man, but unearthed a question that never quite went quiet. And as the years passed and the crown returned and kings once more ruled England, the memory of Charles was not erased. It festered, it lingered, like a wound that never truly closed. Time did not erase him. It twisted him, turned his life into lesson, his death into warning, his silence into echo. Charles III, once a man of silk and scripture, became something else entirely. A mirror held up to every ruler, every people, every generation that dares to believe power can be pure. In the centuries that followed, they argued about what he was. To some, he was a martyr, executed not for tyranny, but for standing too firmly in his belief that kings were sacred. They painted him in oil and light, with a saint's calm eyes and a martyr's calm mouth, kneeling before the block as if it were an altar. The church remembered him with psalms. Some monarchists spoke his name like a prayer, but others remembered the man behind the myth. The silence, the stubbornness, the refusal to bend even as the nation broke. They remembered the taxes levied in God's name, the arrests, the wars, the pride. And in this tension, this split memory, his true legacy was born because Charles didn't just die. He broke something. He shattered the illusion that rulers are untouchable, that crowns are divine, that God speaks only through kings. His execution was not just a political act, it was metaphysical, it was theological. It tore apart centuries of belief in one violent moment. And yet, the monarchy returned. His son, Charles II, walked into London years later to cheers and open arms. The Republic dissolved like a fever dream. The people begged for a crown again, as if the absence had been too much to bear. They wanted stability, familiarity, ritual. But something had changed. From that moment on, every monarch ruled with a shadow at their back. The memory of a January morning, of a block, of a blade, of a king who believed too much in his own holiness. So we ask, one last time, what does it mean to rule? To lead with the belief that heaven is behind you, when earth is crumbling beneath your feet? Charles was not the worst king, nor the best. He was something more terrifying, sincere. He believed too deeply, too rigidly, too blindly. And that, belief once beautiful, became a weapon he turned against his own people, and finally against himself. Today, his blood is long dried. But the idea he died for, divine right, still haunts us. In every leader who refuses to listen, in every tyrant cloaked in righteousness, in every institution that believes itself immune to consequence. We walk through a world built from broken thrones, and if we ever forget the price of sacred power left unchecked, we need only remember the snow, the scaffold, and the silence after the axe, because when kings forget they are men, the people will remind them.